Welcome back to the main event. And today, for episode 4, we are branching out massively as we are lucky enough to speak to a man with 4 number one best selling books, a successful fitness entrepreneur, and much more. Pat Divilly. Pat, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's good to be your first non-fighter.
I know, yeah, a bit of a branch out. And I want to start today with a story for you. So, this book here has been on my mother's bedside. This is your latest book. So, this has been on my mother's bedside for the last, I would say, 4 to 5 months. She's a massive fan of your work and has been for pretty much as long as I can remember. And the day I actually reached out to you about doing this podcast, I was in the gym that I coach out of, and she also trains there. So she came in to do her morning session that day, and I kind of had a smile on my face. I knew kind of what our reaction was going to be. We had got our date sorted, etc. So I was talking to her, and I said, "Yeah, I think we're going to have our next podcast sorted. It looks like it'll be Pat Divilly." I just remember the shock in her face. Her kind of jaw hit the floor, and it was so surreal for her son to be interviewing someone whose work she'd admired and she'd read the books and followed the journey. So I just want to ask you, do you have any idea how impactful your word is and how many people it spreads to?
No.
Not at all.
That's lovely to hear. And I'm sure, she's just super proud of what you're doing at such a young age. But yeah, it's interesting now. What am I, 36? And I kind of got into this at 24. So it's starting to be a different phase where I'm meeting younger people that say, oh,
Yeah.
my parents know who you are and stuff like that. So it's been nice in a way that my journey has been somewhat public, that for the last 12 years I've been putting myself out there and people have seen the transitions from fitness to personal development and so forth. So yeah, it's good to hear.
There's loads that I want to go through today, but I want to start with a question just straight off the bat that I find really interesting personally. In your experience, in your opinion, do men and women respond differently to trauma?
Mm. I think everyone responds differently. Probably like giving a definition around trauma is a good starting point, in that traditionally people thought of trauma as being the big one-off event. So like, it could be an accident or a natural disaster or abuse, or these kind of one-off shocking events where something happens and you're a different person after. Over the last couple of decades, there's been a different definition put on trauma, and it's anything that's too much for us to integrate and make sense of. So when we get overwhelmed, when we live in toxic, stressful environments, all of these scenarios lead to trauma, which is it's too much for our system. Our nervous system can't tolerate what's coming in. And so with that in mind, we all come up with different strategies, different ways of coping. So I don't know if it's a masculine or feminine thing, or if it's a men and women thing, or if it's just we all figure out ways of dealing with pain or dealing with overwhelm or dealing with stress. Some people become overachievers, some people become people pleasers, some people become perfectionists, some people become reclusive. So I think it's very individual.
Because something I noticed with myself personally from my own experiences in general, talking about myself, but also other men, I feel are more likely to, if something's bothering them or if they've had a really stressful day, they're more likely to just say nothing
Mm,
and just try and push through it, get on with it, just kind of blank face it. If
mm.
someone asks them, they'll probably just say nothing and say, yeah, I'm grand. It's the most common response you get in Ireland. Why do you think that is? Because it's something I notice myself doing, but it's something I think that a lot of other people will do. And I just notice it more particularly with men, but it could be in your experience from both.
Mm. Something I talk about is that we all grow up biologically. So obviously we get older, but psychologically or emotionally, sometimes we get stuck. So what that means is that at certain ages, we take on messages about how we're supposed to be. And sometimes we carry those messages for decades. So a really common one is boys don't cry. We hear that as kids. And so the 6 or 7 year old boy locks away his emotions and decides that's not something I'm going to show. On the other side of the coin, a lot of women took on the message that it's not ladylike to be angry. And so maybe they pushed their assertiveness to the side. And then decades later, the boy has a hard time expressing his emotions, and maybe the lady has a hard time expressing her boundaries or saying what she wants or being assertive. So effectively, what I'm saying is we learn early on how we need to be safe. And for a lot of men, it was keep your emotions hidden, don't be needy, don't be vulnerable, don't show those parts of yourself. And so if you learn that and you hide that part of yourself and nobody teaches you or shows you how to bring that part back out, I think it's common that decades later, you're showing up the same way you did as a child, basically.
And do you find that possibly with both, like you said, women are more likely to contain their anger, men are more likely to contain their sadness? Do you find that both situations can lead to, especially in a build-up of stress or as we talked about trauma, can lead to a little bit of a lash out. It can lead to angry moments. It can lead to whether it be throwing something. Like generally, like if something's bottling up inside me, it'll end up in me hitting the table, or it'll be a lash out moment, a build up of anger. Why do you think that is? Is it just like a pressure cooker that pops?
Mm. Well, I think sometimes people think of these emotions as being like something that lives in the head, you know, so I'm anxious or I'm stressed or I'm depressed or whatever it might be. So there's a real cognitive approach to it, like thinking I'll change my thoughts or I'll just look at it from a more positive standpoint or all this kind of thing. Really, with emotional experiences like fear, sadness, grief, anxiety, it's happening in the body. And so if we don't express these things through the body, it's got nowhere to go. Like the simplest example I give is there's a young guy in Galway that I mentored for years, and he had a lot of personal challenges and had a really tough life. And he once told me that he spends hours every day on the punch bag. And he said, "You know why that is?" And I said, "Oh, it's for exercise." And he said, "No," I said, "I need somewhere to put my anger, because if I don't put it somewhere, it's going to go to the wrong place." And that kind of summed it up for me, is that if you don't express your emotion, it sits there and your system looks for experience. Road rage is another example. The super nice person who keeps saying yes to everyone else and no to themselves starts to get resentful and pissed off. And then out of character moments come where they flip at the wrong person. So if you don't use the energy uses you. And I think that's why martial arts and boxing and different modalities, even like physical exercise, can be a good outlet for us for these emotional experiences.
And one thing, like just touching on there from what you talked about, one thing that I've always struggled with when trying to understand psychology, mental well being, trauma, is it's very often not an exact formula.
Mm.
Like I give the example of if you have perhaps male A who may have had an alcoholic father, and let's say, for example, he had an abusive relationship with his partner, and then you had male B who had the exact same upbringing. Male A might grow up to never go near alcohol, to give talks about how alcoholism can ruin families, and he sees what it did to his family, so he understands it. Whereas you might have male B who might grow up also become reliant on alcohol. It could also affect his personal life because he knows nothing else. So there's no exact formula. There's no 2 + 2 = 4. It's not like any other science really. Or that's the one thing that I've always struggled with. So do you find it difficult perhaps working with people who may have gone through similar things in life, similar traumatic experiences, but they're reacting completely differently?
Mm. I think probably the biggest challenge is the judgment that people have on themselves, you know, so maybe they'll compare themselves to other people. So they'll say, "Oh, my life's not that hard. I shouldn't be sad," or "My childhood was not that difficult. I should just get on with it." So I think we all have a unique experience and unique ways of dealing with our stressors. And one of the best things you can do is just like have compassion for yourself, which is easier said than done. But as you say, we all have experiences, and then we have the interpretation of the experience. So two kids in the alcoholic household, one makes the meaning that alcohol's bad, the other makes the meaning that alcohol is the only way to go. And so the meaning we give to our experience ultimately is the most important thing in life. Um, I sometimes give an example. If you go for a job interview and they say no, one person's going to decide, "I've been rejected from the job." It's going to give them a certain feeling. Someone else might say, "The job wasn't right for me." Someone else might say, "I need to upskill." So we all have different interpretations. So I think a lot of the work is recognizing things happen in life, and without even realizing it, we put our own interpretation on it, and we take things personally. You know, someone says no to me when I ask them out on a date, and oh, I've been rejected. Oh, I must be an awful person. All this kind of stuff. I've no idea what's going on in the other person's life. I've no idea. Maybe their fears are coming in. Maybe they've just come out of something. And so, um, that's the challenge, I think, is recognizing. And I say challenge, but it's also there's a lot of freedom in recognizing that I've placed my own meaning on a situation that really is neutral. A lot of our situations in life are neutral, but we make them good or bad based on our perception.
So how do you find, why do people interpret things that may happen to them, whether it be like we talked about, as simple as someone not wanting to go on a date, or as simple as a traumatic upbringing? Why do people interpret it so differently? Is it just perhaps, is it an age thing? I always try to link it to age. Maybe the younger they are, the less you understand, and then the older the more. But then you could still have people the same age view things completely differently. Is there a reason that people interpret things completely differently?
I mean, there's lots of different ways you could look at it. One way you could think about it is that, you know, we all have a negativity bias, meaning our focus tends to go to what's not working or what's lacking or what's wrong, because not because we're negative people, but that's our way of staying safe in the world. If I look for the threat or I look for what's going to go wrong, I can protect myself. And the more stressed you are in life, the more of your life you will spend in that survival state. You'll notice that, you know, if you've got a lot going on, your mind will tend to default to the challenge or the problem or what's not working. And obviously we live in a state of chronic stress, a lot of us, just where things are so busy, we have to be on all the time. So I think when you spend more time in a down-regulated state, so when you're doing things like maybe your yoga or your meditation or your time in nature, and you're looking after your mental health in that way, that gives you permission, or gives you an opportunity at least, to access the different part of the mind. You think about it on a very basic level. If I've got, like, my thumb is my reptilian brain, which is all survival states, and then my thinking human mind sits on top of that. They talk about we flip the lid. So when stress comes on board, we flip the lid and we lose access to our
Survival mode.
creativity. Yeah, you're back in kind of, yeah, how do I survive? And the best way to survive is to do what you've always done. So just go back to your default settings. So in a fitness context, people talk about, oh, I'm going to have my New Year's resolution, and it works until it doesn't work. And when they get stressed, they default to the bottle of wine or to whatever it might be. And then they beat themselves up. But what they don't realize is they need to, this is why meditation and these practices are important. It puts the human mind back online, and I can have perspective rather than being on a treadmill all my life just trying to get through it.
And like when you talk about these things, you can see you're so aware of how certain thoughts mean certain things. And do you ever find yourself sometimes stepping out of your routine, and it can challenge you a little bit because, we might look at you as someone who's so aware of what their thoughts mean and so understanding of their mental health, but so it might be hard for us to understand that sometimes you could step out, sometimes you could, mistrain for a week and it could affect you. Does it ever affect you? And if so,
All the time.
and how do you deal with it, just like any other person?
Yeah, well, I think they say we teach the things we need the most. And so part of the reason I teach this stuff is because I need it. Like, I've got friends that I've grown up with who never look at any of this stuff. They just kind of get on with life and it just seems to work for them. But I struggled a lot with my mental health from a young age, and I had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of fears, all that kind of stuff. So it kind of forced me to proactively go after this. But yeah, I definitely still have patterns that show up. Like, one of the patterns is saying yes to too many things and then feeling overwhelmed. And then when the overwhelm comes, I start thinking more negative, and then I'm going to my old patterns. I think what changes over time is I just get a little bit quicker at noticing the patterns. I was talking to one of my clients last night, and he was saying a big win for him in the last couple of months was he started to notice the signs of depression coming in. Like, in the past, the signs were there, but he couldn't see them. But now in recent times, he started noticing, oh, I'm a bit off. There's something wrong here. And so he's been able to kind of lean into more support. So I think when you look at, like, personal development work or mental health work, it's not about reaching a point where everything falls into place. It's just about getting a little bit better at noticing the signs of you being off, or you being, overwhelmed or stressed or whatever it might be. So
And do you feel like that might come a little bit more from experience? Like, it might be hard to recognize when you might be approaching a stage where you're going to feel down if you've never felt down before. So do you feel in order to develop that skill or that ability that your client is talking about, you have to have gone through, perhaps you have to have gone through a similar situation before, and then you recognize the pattern? Okay, this is coming again. I don't feel great. Or is that kind of,
yeah,
it's an experience thing?
yeah. One way of thinking about it is, they'll talk about oftentimes we're driven by either desperation or inspiration. So if you think about, like, the average person, they get to a point where things are desperate and everything goes wrong, maybe a difficult breakup or going broke or failing with a business or losing a loved one. There's kind of a desperation there where, yeah, I've got to get myself out of this. And this was part of my story back in the day, was failing with the business, and maybe we'll end up talking about that. But you can be driven by that desperation, or on the flip side of the coin, you can be driven by inspiration, which is, I'm so inspired by this thing that I want to do. Maybe think about Gary Cully or some of the guys you've had on who just have this inspiration, like, oh, I'm inspired, I want to be a world champion.
Yeah.
So those two places are quite strong places to create change from. And then a lot of people kind of fall in the middle where life's fine. Like, I'm not too desperate, I'm not too inspired. And so I think the magic is, like, can I create change in my life when I'm not in a desperate place, or I'm not in an overly inspired place, if that makes sense.
Is that a bit of a danger zone, that middle zone, in your opinion?
Personally, I think it can be, because I think you can just end up kind of in stagnation. I think fulfillment in life comes from pursuing things that are meaningful to you, and it's different for everyone. But Tony Robbins, who I don't really study too much anymore, but I used to study a lot, he talks about the two most important principles in life are growth and contribution. So if you want to be fulfilled and you want to be happy in life, you've got to be growing, whatever that means to you. And you've got to be giving back to your community, and whatever that means to you. And if you tick those two boxes, everything works well. If you'd miss those two boxes, doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter how much of a six pack you have, doesn't matter how many people love you, you're not going to feel, because it's just a law of nature. Everything in nature grows or it dies, and everything in nature contributes to a bigger ecosystem. So one of the challenges in the West is that we are very individualistic, and we want to be successful for ourselves. But you see from famous celebrities and stuff that end up going to rehab that there can be an isolation in that. And so we need contribution in community.
Do you feel like there's a balance that has to be found in perhaps discussing your personal issues or how you're feeling a little bit too much? So, for example, if I had a very stressful day at work or whatever I was doing, the last thing that I would want to do, and maybe I'm on my own or maybe there's other people similar, is come home and put that stress onto my partner or put that stress onto my family. It's something you would perhaps like to keep to yourself because you don't want it to affect your home life. Maybe you try and keep the two things separate. Do you feel there's a balance in being possibly too open and expressing and dumping your emotions on everyone else, I think is the correct term,
Mm.
as opposed to saying, okay, now it's just the time to hold it back and just, I'll be okay for a day or two to say nothing. Do you find there's a balance to find there?
I think it's important that everyone has somewhere they can go where they can share, whether that's a therapist or it's a men's group or it's a women's group or it's a group of friends that you have somewhere where you can express what's going on for you,
Mm.
like in a getting the words out kind of thing. Like male suicide over the last couple of decades is obviously like a huge issue, and particularly in Ireland. And with suicide in particular, there's a deep level of shame, which is the idea that there's something wrong with me. I'm bad. I'm isolated. I'm wrong. There's a real self-loathing in that. And one of the tenets of shame is that when we feel shame, we want to hide from the world
Mm.
because there's this sense of I'm not enough. And so I want to push people away. And of course, the more I push people away, the more I get stuck in my own head. And then the stories just get deeper and deeper and deeper. So when we find ourselves in those states, I think as much as we don't want to do it in the time, it's really important to connect and to lean in. So again, I would say it's important you have a place. It's also important to be discerning. Like there's certain people you can share your problems with and they're going to make you feel worse because they're going to try and fix you. And sometimes we don't want to be fixed. We just want someone to hear where we're challenged. Like I know I've had times where I'm really struggling and I'll share it with a friend and they say, oh, just be positive. I'm like, that doesn't help
That's
me.
not the
That
point.
makes me feel worse about
Yeah.
myself because it makes me feel wrong for having my experience. So yeah, I think being discerning. I think also, we probably had the experience of a friend coming to us with challenges and you try to support and they don't change and they keep coming and that can get frustrating too. So we don't want to fall into that trap. But having somewhere I think is the key.
So it's more about having a support network, if you would, that there's always someone or a group of people, whether it be friends, partner, family, that you can go and speak to.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges in modern times is that we have less community now. So if you think about a couple of generations ago, there would have been more of a leaning onto the community.
The neighborhood and that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, if someone's got a partner, and I think it's common that people expect their partner to meet all of their needs. So my partner should be my therapist, my partner should be my best friend, my partner should be my lover. And there's so much pressure put on one person that that's impossible for the other person to meet those expectations. And so that can be difficult. So again, I think it's important to, yeah, have different places. And if I'm having problems with my partner, it might be nice for me to be able to share that with someone else and make sense of it before I go to my partner and can't get the words out in the right way. So
When someone says something that really upsets you or really gets to you, how do you react now with all your experience in the field?
a lot of it's about just recognizing what's mine and what's theirs. So what I mean by that is, again, it's interpretations. So if, like 10 years ago, I started going online with fitness and all that stuff that I was doing back then. And I got great support at the start. I was this guy in Galway that was teaching classes and the classes were growing and I was getting loads of love. And then, of course, you start getting a bit of the negative feedback, or this guy's a spoofer, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, this all this kind of stuff. And I would feel personally attacked back then. And I had all these stories, oh, I'm just a young guy trying to give it a go. And I would take it very personal. So that was kind of back then. It was like something's happening. I'm taking it personal and now I feel bad about myself. Now it's I can just reflect a bit more. So if someone says something to me I don't like, they've said something, and then I take responsibility for how I feel. So maybe I feel angry, maybe I feel sad, maybe I feel fearful, and I kind of explore that a bit more. Because sometimes there's truth in things when people say hurtful things to us. There's a bit of truth, and you can throw the baby out with the bathwater sometimes and just dismiss it. And, oh, they're wrong and I'm right. Usually there's somewhere in the middle. Like there's a part of me that feels like a spoofer sometimes. So when people call me a spoofer and it stings, it's because there's a bit of truth in it. A part of me feels that way. And so it's a chance for me to make peace with the part of me that feels like a spoofer. So a lot of the time it's not about them, it's about us and how we perceive things.
I found it really interesting to learn that when you finished school, you spent quite a bit of time in California,
Mm.
over in the US, learning martial arts.
Mm.
How did you find that experience overall? And, specifically what martial arts? I know now you're very interested in your jujitsu, but why was martial arts something you pushed towards as a young man?
I was bullied a lot when I was young, and I kind of like, I just struggled a lot when I was younger. And I found judo when I was 15. It was funny. I was obsessed with professional wrestling, like obsessed. And I emailed this wrestling school when I was 15. So you go back like 20 years ago, my dad's Aircom account. And I said, I want to be a wrestler when I finish school, but I need to finish school first. What can I do to get me ready? And they said, start lifting weights and learn judo so you can learn how to fall without hurting yourself. So I started lifting weights. And the next day in school, I seen there was a judo classes starting in school. So I started judo. I won some Irish titles. Then I started boxing. I started Thai boxing. And then I went to California to be a cage fighter when I think I was 18. So I moved to San Diego. I would train 3 times a day, sleep in the gym. I used to train with Dominic Cruz. War Machine was there. He was I moved into his room when I was out there. He was a famous fighter back then. He was like a controversial character. But it was insecurity that drove me to martial arts and wanting to be somebody. And I kind of latched on. It's funny, like when we experience pain, we respond by becoming something. So I had pain from being bullied. And so I became a fighter. And then people start mirroring back how they see you. Oh, Pat's a fighter now. And I didn't even love being a fighter. It was just something that I'm getting validation and I'm safe now because people aren't picking on me anymore. And so I ran with it. And I wasn't any good. I was a dreamer, but it's been a common theme in my life for the last 20 years that I find people that are good at the thing I want to do and I go and I spend time with them and I try to be in environments that help me grow. So I did a couple of summers there and then I fought down in Mexico in Tijuana and
In boxing, MMA.
MMA, yeah.
Wow.
And and then I came back and I tried to be a grown up and get a real job and I quit martial arts and all that kind of thing. And I woke up at 28 and I achieved everything I wanted. I bought a house and a car and I had a great business and great girlfriend. But I was struggling with my mental health. And I sat down and I asked myself, when was I happiest in my life? And it was when I was 18 in California and I had no money, but I did what I loved every day. And so I thought, oh, it's time to go back to martial arts. So I took up jiu-jitsu again, probably 8 years ago. And it's a big part of my life now. So
How old were you when you first got started being bullied?
first day of school when I was in primary school. And then we moved around a lot. My family moved to different places. So I kind of had this, something I often share with people is that the first 7 years of our life give us a blueprint as to who we are, how the world is. So if you have a difficult couple of years, you oftentimes will come to the belief that the world is not safe or people are not safe or I'm not safe. And those were some of the kind of messages that I took on. And unless you learn to challenge those stories later in life and work through them, you'll oftentimes recreate the same cycle again and again and again. So, if I develop a story early on that people don't respect me or people don't love me or I don't fit in, that was one of my big stories. Is I'm an outsider. I don't fit in.
Why did you feel like that? Just
being bullied and then always moving around the place. So I'd always be the new guy sort of thing. So I never felt like I fully fit in anywhere. Kind of fit in here, kind of fit in there. I'm doing martial arts. When I was in secondary school, I was doing martial arts. I was in bands, playing music. I was playing rugby. I was doing all these things, but I still didn't feel like
I feel like you struggled to fit in a little bit with
all
the groups in school and stuff like that.
yeah, I was just in my own head, and yeah, even like being successful in my 20s and stuff, I recognized I still have this belief that I don't fit in. And so I think part of the pain you've experienced in your life allows you to, I say the wound is the womb. So whatever your wound was in life is a womb for like what you can create. So my pain was not fitting in. And now my gift to the world has been creating communities. So I've kind of built the thing that I needed that I didn't have. And I think that's where you find purpose.
And was there a moment where you either stopped caring about fitting in and became happier within yourself, or you felt like you fit into the world, you'd found your place, and that's when it turned a little bit? Because you said at 28 you still weren't happy fully with yourself. You still didn't feel like you fit in. So did it become a case of not caring whether you fit in or not, or I feel like I fit in, I have found my place?
I suppose the way I see it now is that like we're sat in front of each other and like we think it's one person in front of me, or you might think it's, in reality, each of us are made up of like hundreds of different parts. So like there's a younger part of me, there's a perfectionist part of me, there's a rebel part of me, there's an outsider, there's a connect of all these different personalities, sub personalities you'd call them. And there's times where the outsider part of me creeps in and I still feel it at times. And I just need to kind of put that part at ease. It might sound strange, but it's kind of communicating with your different parts. So when my fears come in around not being enough or not fitting in or whatever it might be, I used to believe it and I used to think that's who I was. But now I'm just like, oh no, it's just a part of me.
And
Part
do
of
you
me
still
scared.
get those fears quite often, or
Here and there, I work with people around the different parts that they have, and a big part that most people have is the inner critic. Like it's a really common part, the inner critic that tells us we're not enough or whatever it might be. And what I share with people is that usually your inner critic comes in when you've done something new or you've tried something new. So someone tries to go to the gym for the first time, their inner critic is in saying everyone's looking at you and all this kind of thing. So your inner critic really is not a bad part of you. It's actually trying to keep you safe because it knows that if you stay in your comfort zone, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I put out a new program, if I try something new in my own life, my inner critic comes in and says, who do you think you are? Still, you know? And I recognize that's just trying to keep me safe. So similar when that kind of feeling of being an outsider comes in, I don't see it as a bad part. I recognize, I feel a little bit stressed or a little bit overwhelmed. When we feel stressed or overwhelmed, oftentimes these different characters take over and you just need to kind of put them at ease rather than believe in them.
When you moved back to Dublin after spending a lot of time in America, you said you started your first fitness business, which in your own words you said failed and hit the ground. What was that whole period like for you? Because you obviously turned it around and, as you said, turned to a successful fitness entrepreneur by 28. You said you had a nice house, nice car, everything was going good. How did you find that period? How did you switch over? Especially because being a young man, you said you were 15 when you first walked into a gym and you decided straight there and then, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So, how did you find your first fitness business falling flat on its head? Did you find that quite hard to take because it's something you wanted for so long?
Yeah, it was really hard because, again, I'm 36, so we talked 21 years ago that I walked into the gym, and Ireland didn't really have a fitness industry at that time. There was nobody that I could look to and say, "Oh, this person's like." Maybe Carl Henry was one guy, the guy from Operation Transformation online, or on RTE. Um, but I came out of college and I told everyone around me, I'm leaving Galway, I'm going to Dublin, I'm going to be successful as a fitness trainer. And I had these ambitions, and everyone around me said it's not going to work. My parents, even, who were supportive, just said, there's no industry, it's not going to happen. But I was adamant and I was defiant. I'm going to make this happen. I was young, male ego. I'm going to make this happen. So when I failed, it was really difficult because I had to come back with my tail between my legs at 24. Shame, yeah. Yeah, I failed. I have to look my parents in the eye. Can I move back in with you? And in retrospect, it's not a big deal. I was 24. But at the time, I was such a dreamer and I had such belief in myself. And it really shattered my confidence. And to be honest, I don't think Facebook was the thing back then. Maybe Facebook was the thing. I can't remember. But on social media, whatever the social media was at the time, I was putting out this image of how successful I was in Dublin. And I would never come back to Galway because I had no money to come back to Galway. But my friends thought I was successful. And I would train all the models in Dublin for free because I knew it would get me some attention. Wow. So my friends see me training models, never coming home. They said, Pat's made it. In reality, I was working in the ILAC Centre in a clothes shop and doing security. And I was broke. I was borrowing money from anyone I could. And just trying to fight till the end. And when I failed, it was just my whole ego, I suppose, collapsed in terms of like, I don't know who I am anymore.
And does that kind of thing of looking for for example, showing off a wealthy life that you actually didn't have, but you wanted to show others, is that a little bit, in your opinion now, a little bit of self-validation? You wanted validation from other people. Oh, Pat's doing great. He's in Dublin. He's working away. But you didn't have that validation from what you were actually doing in your day-to-day job. You had it from perhaps social media or from displaying a life that you didn't actually have.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. Yeah. I think a lot of mental health challenges in life can come down to the disconnect between the life you're portraying and how you actually feel about your life. I think the bigger that gap, the more you're going to struggle. And it happens a lot now. Social media, I saw some study that they did where they said to a bunch of 18-year-olds, we'll either give you a holiday worth €5,000, but you can't take any photos and can't post about it, or we'll give you photos of a pretend holiday and you can post them. Wow. Which you want. And most of them chose, I want to be able to post the photos. I don't want the holiday.
Why do you think the modern, especially young people, are just looking for validation? They're just looking for something they can't fill with themselves.
Yeah, well, I think we're all conditioned to into certain things from a very young age as to what we should want in order to be happy. Like when I think about my years in Limerick growing up, the most important thing was having a Man United football top and a pair of Nike runners. And if you had that, you should be happy. And from a very early age, you're learning like you need these things to be happy. And your childhood self is very, susceptible to this kind of messaging. And I think a lot of people never question that. Maybe they fall into work that they don't particularly like. And so they think about what would make me happy. Maybe it's looking a certain way or taking holidays that look a certain. So yeah, I think a lot of people are prone to. And part of it's down to the fact we're disconnected from our feelings. If I'm disconnected from my feelings, then I don't know how I feel about things. Then I don't know when I feel fulfilled or when I feel happy. I don't know. So yeah, I think it's common that we live in our heads and we think, how should my life look rather than how does my life feel?
So you moved back to Galway. How did you go from broke in Dublin, asking to move back in with your mom and dad,
Yeah.
to successful entrepreneur?
I I was working a pizza shop in town for a little bit, and it was funny because I had started a fitness Facebook page, and I think I had like 200 followers, and people started coming into the pizza shop, and some people look at me twice. They're like, "Are you the fitness guy?" And they're like, what pizza should I eat?" And I'm like, "I don't know." Um, but when I was at my lowest, I was really struggling. I was walking on the beach for hours every day and just crying, and I'd meet my parents' friends, and I'd have all this shame where they'd be telling me about their successful kids being in Australia and doing this, that, and the other. And they'd ask me what I was doing. And I'd say, oh, I just moved back in. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm working in a pizza shop. And, they'd be saying, I thought you were a fitness guy. What are you doing working in a pizza shop? I was just like, I didn't know who I was. And my dad said to me at the time, it was kind of some tough love, but he said, half of your problem is you're obsessed with your own problems. And that's why you're sad. And he said, if you got out of your own head and you actually help people in some capacity, you'd feel better. And at the time, I felt I can't help anyone. I can barely get out of bed. And he said, join a charity or do something that will get you out of your own way. And so my solution, I suppose, was I started giving free fitness plans. So I'd work a split shift in the pizza place where I'd work in the morning, have a couple hours off, and then I'd work in the evening. I started offering free plans to anyone that wanted them. And so I'd sit with people and do consultations, just get them to buy me a coffee, and I'd do the free training nutrition plan. And I didn't ask anything of it. And then a couple of months later, this guy messaged me and he said, you didn't ask for this, but here's my before and after picture. And he had this ridiculous transformation. He had done the work. I mean, I hadn't, done much. And it was a before and after. And he said, if it helps you to advertise your fitness business, which I didn't have at the time, he said, you can use it. So I shared this photo. It went semi-viral at the time, which was not very many people sharing it. And that prompted me to start fitness classes on the beach. And I had 5 people on the first morning, and it just grew and it just took off. And within the 3 months, there was 100 people coming to the beach. And then within a year, there was 500. And I opened a gym and brought out my first book. And I got lucky because a lot of my generation was gone to Australia and to Canada and to America because of the recession. And people started saying, what's going on in Galway? Like, why is everyone training in the rain and stuff? And that made me put the classes online. I think I was the first trainer in Ireland doing online fitness at scale.
What year was this?
2013. So 2014, I was runner up in Ireland's Best Young Entrepreneur. I won a bunch of entrepreneurial awards for the fitness business. I had about 800 clients a month online and 200 down in Galway. And so my whole life changed. Facebook brought me in as a case study for someone that was using Facebook for business. They brought me out to California. Everything changed. My whole life changed. I started doing a bit of TV and radio, did the Late Late Show. But it all came down to, I think part of it was telling my story. I was talking about my struggles, and people kind of probably could see a bit of themselves in the struggle. And the big thing, I think, was just creating a culture of belief where it was funny. When I was 21, 22, I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach and work with athletes. And then when I started working with the general public and someone would do their first push-up and they'd be so excited, I was like, wow, this is cool. Like, this is fulfilling. And I just created a culture where I made people think they could do anything. And that became, everyone felt that way within our gym. And so people started changing jobs, starting new relationships. Everything started changing for people.
So you said that despite being as successful as you just described on the Late Late Show, you still said at 28 you weren't fully satisfied in yourself. Why was that? Was it still previous issues from the failed business, from the bullying? Do you feel they were still affecting you?
I kind of have a belief that I don't know, it might seem a little bit out there for some people, but my belief is we come into the world and we've all got a unique kind of mission to live in this life. And you've got lessons you need to learn. You've got experiences you need to have. You've got challenges you need to face. And all of this is for you to kind of fulfill whatever your unique mission was. And I think once you do certain things, sometimes you've learned your lesson and you need to move to the next thing. So what I mean by that is I did the fitness thing for a couple of years. There was huge growth in that. I taught thousands of classes. I did a couple of 100 workshops. I did a lot in a couple of years. And a part of me just kind of felt, okay, I've done what I need to do here. And I was ready to move on to something new. But then another part of me was afraid to move on to something new. And I think that's where the pain came from, or the difficulty came from. It's like someone staying in a relationship that they're not happy in anymore, or staying in a job that doesn't fulfill them anymore. You can get away with that for a while. But for me, at least, after a while, I feel like I'm lying to myself. And there was a bit of resistance there for me. At 28, I felt I had done what I needed to do in fitness and I needed a new challenge, but I was too afraid to take the leap. So that was the difficulty until I took the leap.
And because you are known as I suppose the fitness guy of Galway, did you feel that level of shame again when you had to take a step away from it and admit that you weren't fully happy with what you were doing anymore? Did you get a similar level of shame than perhaps you would have when you came back from Dublin with no job?
Not so much shame, but there was fear around, because like when you have nothing and then you build something, there's a part of you that says I should be grateful and just kind of stick with this. I can't really afford to be taking chances. And everyone around me had said you're never going to be successful in fitness. And then when I built this success in fitness, everyone around me says you can't walk away from this. So everyone around me was telling me what I should do. And from a business standpoint, it didn't make sense to just walk away from it, but I knew I wasn't happy. So I gave the gym to my friend. I stopped doing the online fitness
You gave the
classes.
gym or you sold the gym?
I passed it to him fairly
Okay.
cheap. And he took over. And then I kind of went on a bit of a quest to figure out like what was next for me. And I started doing talks and personal development work and stuff like that more. And from the outside looking in, sometimes people thought it was this smooth transition, but it definitely didn't feel like that for a few years. It took a few years to feel like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing now again.
So it seemed like you went more from the focus shifted from physical health and physical training to mental well-being and trauma release. You're now obviously breathwork coach. Was there one specific thing that triggered that made that switch go from more physical to mental health?
There was two things. One was like working with clients. So I had over 20,000 clients in 4 years. And when you work with that many people, you start to see patterns. So I was looking at it and we would do fairly generic plans. People would get similar plans and it was group training. It wasn't one-to-ones. Even the online stuff was group. And when you work with that many people, you say, okay, well, everyone's getting the same level of support, same nutrition plans, similar training plans, but people are getting very different results.
So is it a little bit like what I spoke about earlier with it's never an exact formula with mental health and well-being.
Yeah, well, it was like, what else is going on here? It's
Yeah.
like the way people are speaking themselves is having an impact here because some people are taking the plan and running with it and it's just happening. Other
Yeah.
people are struggling. And that prompted me to get curious about how we speak to ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves and all that kind of stuff. So that got me more into coaching and stuff like that. And then, it just went deeper from there. I did a couple of years of the really cognitive stuff, the really the mind stuff, challenging our thoughts, challenging our beliefs, noticing our limiting beliefs. And that was useful up to a certain point. And then I got more into the emotional stuff, which is kind of a different kettle of fish. But yeah, it's just deepened, I think, over time. So that was one side was my clients. And then obviously the other side was myself, where, as I say, I had everything on paper that I wanted and I still didn't feel content within myself. So it was like, what's really going on here? And that prompted me to, a lot of my work has been figuring out my own stuff or trying to figure out my own stuff and then kind of sharing what I'm learning.
Do you feel like social media has improved or ruined the whole fitness industry in Ireland and worldwide, or do you have a kind of in the middle opinion?
I'm pretty disconnected from the fitness industry. I don't really,
You've
I
not,
don't really
okay.
understand what's going on anymore.
Right.
When I got a bit burnt out at 28 with the gym and I started my jiu-jitsu and stuff. The last couple of months I've gone back to lifting weights again just for myself, but I see everything that's happening. It feels like everyone's a coach now and stuff like that. It's hard to know. It's hard to know. I think probably in all industries, one of the challenges is probably that I suppose back in the day you would have had to build, I'm talking before me, you would have had to build your profile slowly and steadily through results and stuff like that. Whereas now with the internet, marketing can help people fast track that, which is not a bad thing in itself, just as long as people, I suppose, know what they're doing.
More social media coaches than actual proper good coaches.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people, selling how to sell a program, but I don't know how many people are selling how to actually
Get in shape.
get results,
Yeah.
and have lasting results. So that's I don't think that's just a fitness thing. I think that's across the board.
So, as someone who was successful in the industry, say for example, as terrifying as it might seem to you now, if you were to step back into that same style of training and coaching, what kind of advice would you give to someone who was going to try and create a successful fitness business?
Um, my thing would be, I suppose, do it around your values. Like, what do you value? Like, my values back in the day were community. So I didn't really do any one-to-one because I just wanted to build communities. So that was a value of mine. Belief was a value of mine. So creating belief in people, helping them do things they didn't think they could do. Um, Reciprocity was a value of mine, which means what you give, you get back. So getting people to really get involved with the community. Community was the big piece. Belief and belonging, those were the two words that I built my business on, was help people believe and give them a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves. So it's kind of that growth and contribution thing I mentioned earlier. So I would encourage people to know their values. Some people value adventure, other people value education, other people value growth. But how do you take the things you value and bring them into your business? Because that's your unique business then. It's not you just doing what everyone else in the industry is doing. That's the problem, I think, with social media, is people lose their authentic self because they get so caught up in what's everyone else doing. Or they post one reel that's really successful and they start thinking, how do I do more of the same? Rather than thinking, what do I actually want to do? What actually helps people?
You said you're back into training jiu-jitsu now, and it's something that you've taken an interest in. What do you feel that does for your mind more than anything? Because looking from the outside in, it's a sport that seems very mentally testing. It seems very, it's all the people say it's like a mathematical formula. It's working out physically still, but it's working out with your brain at the same time. How do you find that helps you now with your running your business and your whole life?
I don't know if it's Chris Wills. Is that his name? Chris Willis or
Chris
Willis?
Wilson, yeah, yeah,
I think it was him I heard talk about it, maybe with James Smith or someone a couple of
yeah,
years ago. Did they call it the menopause?
yeah,
Where
yeah.
basically, I think they were saying it towards your late 20s, you kind of don't want to do the gym bro thing anymore. You've done it for long enough and you need something else. That was probably what it was for me, was I needed something different that ticked different boxes. I think I found when I was like 20, 21, 22. Yeah, I probably went to the gym with my friend, or no, I went to the gym and I did my thing, and I had my social circles outside of that. So I had my friends and I'd meet. Then as you get a bit older, everyone's doing different things. The social circle is maybe not the same, so you don't have the same social life unless it's the pub. So jiu-jitsu,
Doesn't interest you, no?
I did that enough in my 20s.
Really?
Yeah, it's something that I talk about sometimes, is like everything we do, even when it doesn't make sense, serves a purpose. So I always encourage people to look at the behavior that they do that they don't want to do and ask, what does it give them? And when I was in my 20s, I drank like a fish, like just on the weekends, but I would go out and get blackout drunk. And I felt disconnected because I'm a fitness guy during the week and then I'm getting hammered on the weekends, every weekend. And when I look back at it, what I realized was it was giving me something. So it was giving me a place where I could switch off from being the boss. It was giving me a way of quietening my mind because I would be prone to being very active in the mind, very overactive. It was giving me a social outlet that wasn't the gym because I had no social outlet at that time. So it was giving me those three things. And then when I recognized that, I was able to kind of say, well, how else can I meet those three needs? Because those are needs that we all have. So on the other side of the coin, if I join jiu-jitsu, quietens my mind, gives me a social circle, gives me somewhere I don't have to be the boss. So I replaced an unhealthy behavior with a healthy behavior. I worked with a client years ago and he was a gambling addict. And when we kind of explored it, we recognized that he had no friends or family left in his life. And the only place he had social connection, which is the most important fundamental human need, was in the bookies. So on some weird level, it made complete sense that he would keep going back, even though the bookies was taken so much from him.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only place in his life where there was social connection. So I think it's useful for people to recognize, okay, I emotionally eat. What does that give me? It gives me a sense of comfort. It helps me deal with my emotions and whatever else it is. And then starting to think, how can I do this in healthier ways? So for me, jiu-jitsu gives me community. It gives me physical and mental exercise. I travel a lot, so it gives me the freedom to meet new people when I travel. There's a competitive nature. You can join, you go to competitions. Gives me a lot. Yeah. Helps me connect to my inner teenager too.
Do you feel like your ability to say no to people has improved drastically? You mentioned earlier you were quite a yes man when you were younger. Even like I can't imagine you as someone who would really like to go to the pub. And people like that generally they get dragged by their friend group or whoever it is. They can get pulled in, pulled in, pulled in. So was it a case where you would say yes to things like that too much? Have you gotten a lot better at being able to say no, I need myself time, or no, I have this to do, or if you
I think the pub for me was like, it was a couple of things. One was I didn't know how to handle my emotions. So a Friday would come and I'd lock the door of the gym, having taught X amount of classes during the week, and there'd be high energy in the gym all week and stuff like that. And at the time, I thought I was excited. I'd say, oh, I'm excited for the weekend. In retrospect, I was anxious and I didn't know how to deal with the anxiety. So I know what I was doing now was just trying to take the pressure off of what I was feeling. So I was numbing myself with alcohol. Um, Outside of that, there was just a cultural thing. You know, we grew up in the pubs and stuff like that, drinking Buckfast in Galway, and that was just like something that we weren't outgrowing. So it's what everyone around me was doing. But I think it was a way of, I'm a sensitive person. I was always sensitive. I can feel things. I feel a lot of energy, and I can feel what's going on for people and stuff like that. And I was never comfortable in. It's kind of a stupid thing, or it might seem silly, but I think I asked myself in my 20s, like, why do I drink so much when I go out? And the reason was because I don't feel comfortable in pubs or clubs. And then I thought, well, why do I go to pubs and clubs? I've got two options here. I don't go to pubs and clubs, or I keep going and having to drink to feel comfortable. It doesn't make sense to go somewhere that I have to drink to be comfortable. So I think that's what was driving me.
You said you talk about the moment where you might come in after a busy week and it sounds like you just struggle to sit with yourself. You feel excited, but you're actually anxious. And I think that's definitely something personally. I think I probably struggle with that a little bit. I struggle to just sit in peace by myself. Is that something you're a lot better at now? You're able to sit and just think, or do you have ways of distracting yourself, or is it still a bit of a you can't really sit by yourself and just think anymore?
Like, like one of my mentors is a guy called Gabor Mate, who does a lot around addictions and traumas and stuff. And one of the things he talks about is how in our culture, certain addictions are kind of frowned upon. So like alcohol, drugs, gambling, but other addictions are celebrated. So it's celebrated to be hardworking. That people don't see that as an addiction. If you're working all the time or being a people pleaser and saying yes all the time, that's also an addiction.
And do
So
you feel like they are negative addictions?
I think they can be. I think everything
Okay.
done to excess can be, problematic. When I over-identify with being hardworking, and that's kind of my badge of honor, oftentimes I don't know how to rest, and that becomes a problem. If I over-identify with being a nice guy, then I give too much to other people and I can't give to myself, and that's a problem. So I think anything done to excess can be an addiction.
Yeah.
Addiction really is like, I don't want to feel my feelings, so I do this thing instead. I don't want to feel my loneliness or my sadness, or I don't want to feel my anger, and so I distract myself with work. That's when it becomes an addiction. Um, I'm better at sitting with myself now for sure. I have more tools, but I definitely still fall into overworking, and I catch myself quicker, I think, than I did when I was younger.
Yeah. So, like, as someone, again, speaking personally here, in their early 20s, who loves to work, doesn't really like to do much else apart from it, I do struggle a little bit to. I noticed on Sunday in particular. I remember a famous Tyson Fury quote. He said Sunday is his least favorite day of the
Mm.
week
Yeah.
because he has to sit and rest. He can't go to the gym, and that's where he'd be more likely to make a mess of himself or make a mess of his week.
Mm.
And it's something I notice with myself, not to the levels of Tyson Fury, thank God, but I would struggle to sit on a Sunday if everything is done and the week has gone perfectly. I would struggle to sit down and just say that was a good week.
Mm.
I have to go and find. So normally my resort is I go and study because I think in the way the industry goes, you have to keep learning, you have to keep evolving. So that's just kind of the way I work around it. But there definitely does become a point where I say, why can't I just sit down and take a second? Do I feel the need to go and fill the time when I could just sit and take the time out? I don't know if you listened, but on a recent Chris Williamson podcast, Alex Hormozy told the story of someone asked him to do a podcast when he was in a different part of the country, and he said he wasn't able, and they said, oh, just even 20 minutes, and he took out the calendar on his phone in front of them, and he said, so his calendar was empty, and he said, see, my calendar there is empty. He said, I just want to keep it that way. But that's something that I think a lot of people, myself included, would struggle to do, to keep an empty calendar, to keep time for yourself.
Mm.
So first of all, why do you think that is, and how is it something, or how can you work on it in order to make yourself that little bit better at it?
Um, I think one thing is there's different phases and there's different chapters of life. So like I definitely think my 20s were like a real building phase, and I'm going back into a bit of a building phase now. I've been a bit relaxed the last while, but I'm focused now on some things that I want to build over the next few years. And so I think there's different phases. So just having an awareness as to where you're going into. So maybe the next couple of months I've really got the head down. I definitely think the rest thing obviously is important all the time. Um, Something I've been exploring recently is a lot of people talk about being afraid to say no. And this is something for me, sometimes afraid to say no. An interesting exercise you can do around that is to ask yourself, what's going to happen if I say no? Just to explore your beliefs. So for example, if you asked me to do the podcast and I said no and I was afraid to say no, I'd ask myself, if I say no, what would happen? He'll think I'm ignorant. He won't like me. He'll tell everyone around. And so there's all these probably beliefs that are running the show. So I think that's what stops people from keep taking time for themselves, from stepping away from work. Um, Also, maybe, I know when I was a bit younger, I didn't really have much outside of my work
Yeah.
that was worth switching off for. My work, for good or for bad, my work ticked a lot of the boxes. It was my social outlet. It was my passion. It was my lots of different. And again, this is why jiu-jitsu was one of the great things that came into my life.
And do you see that as good? Like that it's better to perhaps fill your calendar with work that you enjoy that satisfies everything, as opposed to fill half of it with that and then have to find something else, which is where people can resort to alcohol and other examples.
I think like a really useful thing anyone can do is write down what they need in their life to be happy. So most of us need connection. Most of us need some form of growth. Most of us need something we're passionate about. Most of us need, and we have a list of needs. And then I'd be looking at how do I meet those needs? And I think it can be a problem when all your needs come from one place. It's kind of like I said earlier, if I want my partner to tick every box that I need socially, it's putting a lot of pressure on them. If I want my work to meet all of my needs, it's putting a lot of pressure on my work. And so I think it's good to spread those needs. So my work gives me this, 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 and this. My different relationships help me with this, 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 and this. And then my hobbies help me with this, 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 and this. I think that's a better way maybe to spread. So there's not too much pressure on any one part of your life.
I'd love to get your opinion on the following. So, the definition of stoicism, which is the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. Should people be stoic, in your opinion?
I believe in range, which means I think we should be able to access different parts of ourselves. So you can think about different people representing different things. David Goggins is real kind of stoic, be hard or stay hard or whatever it is. I think it really works for him by the looks of things, and I would never tell anyone how to live their life. Personally, I want to be able to access different parts. So I want to be able to dip into like that stoic mindset when I need it, but I don't want to be limited to one way of being. Because your stoicism is going to work really well in your work and getting things done and going to the gym, but it's not going to work well with your partner when they want to have a heart to heart and they want to see your heart and they want to see how you feel and they want to hear what's true for you. That's when stoicism fails, for me at least.
So did you see like you almost have a toolbox of feelings and ways of dealing with things, and you have to try and through experience, I suppose, pull from when to use each one?
There's a frame that I really like for men, and I mean, similar can be done for women, but for men, there's this idea of the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. King, warrior, magician, and lover. It's 4 aspects of us. Your king is the part of you that has a vision for your life and has kind of the overarching kind of, this is what my life is about. This is what's important to me. Your king might plan your week and sort of have a sense of, okay, this is where I'm going. Your warrior is the part of you that goes and gets shit done. Your lover is the part of you that connects and can enjoy the present moment. And your magician is the strategizer that can kind of map things out. So for me, a healthy man is able to access those 4 parts of himself. He's got a vision and clarity in his life. He's able to do the work when it needs to be done. He's able to connect to the people that he loves, and he's able to strategize and map things out. But most men will be stuck in warrior because we learned that you should be a human doing. You're only of value if you're getting things done. And so that limits them. And again, they might be great in the office, but if they can't connect to their partner or the kids when they get home. See, I'm at a different phase of life now where I'm starting to see everyone around me getting married and having kids and stuff. So it's different things. When I was 20, it was just go to the gym and be a beast. Now it's how do I become more of myself? How do I, it's if you can only be one way in life, you make your life very small. But if you can recognize, okay, now I need to tap more into this. And it can be simple. You get back from the gym and you take 10 deep breaths in the car before you step into your house. So you step into a different energy. You sit in the car before the gym and you step into your warrior and you put on some music that gets you into that. But being able to switch hats, I think, is important.
I'm not sure, just touching on that, I'm not sure how aware you are of, the online world. You mentioned David Goggins. He's just someone that popped into my head as an example. I definitely feel from talking to young people, especially teenagers and young boys, particularly teenage boys, that the narrative that they will be following a lot nowadays is that David Goggins mindset that no one cares about your emotions, get on with it, don't listen to yourself, how you feel, you just work, you push, you have a job to do basically. Do you feel that's a dangerous narrative to be pushed on the I suppose the next generation of young people, particularly young men who are being pushed that narrative by, for example, just Dave Goggins is the example you gave?
I think for sound bites and for marketing and for business, people like to make things very black and white and be very polarized and say things to piss people off. And their mentality is, I'll pick up some people and I'll piss off a lot of people. And so the likes of Andrew Tate and all these guys just come out with these polarized, black and white ways of seeing the world. And the world is not black and white. And you'll make your life hard, I think, if you stay in black and white, because, in that example, if it's just get on with it and all this kind of stuff, and that's your way of being, then anytime your emotions come in, which they will come in because you're a human, you're going to feel bad, and you're going to beat yourself up, and you're going to shame yourself, and you're going to think there's something wrong with you. So I think it's problematic. I think it's problematic to tell people not to feel their feelings. Um, there's a middle ground with all of this stuff. I think it's also problematic for. It's interesting if you look at the change in masculinity over the years. Men used to be very kind of, there was this kind of men go to work and they get things done and they're stoic, and then feminism happened and women kind of raised up, and equal rights, and women kind of found their power more, and found more of their voice. And then a lot of men um, got more feminine, for lack of a better word, where there was more of a I'll be a nice guy, and they lost maybe some of that drive. They thought that to be a good man was to be really nice and to be really gentle and all this
Right.
kind of stuff. Yeah. And there needs to be a middle ground, I think, between the two. Again, if you think about the warrior and the lover as two archetypes, the warrior is just like stoic, get things done, businessman, corporate kind of type of guy, and then the lover is the artist that never finishes a project and is just flowing through life. I think finding the middle ground between those two energies is healthy masculinity for me.
For all the people that you've worked with, what is the most common issue you would see with mental health in both men and women? And is there a huge difference in what you'll hear from both genders?
I mean, I've worked primarily with men the last couple of years.
Do you
Um,
find that because you can relate to them because you are a man, do you find that a little bit easier than perhaps relating to a female?
well, it's kind of been an interesting non-planned transition with that. When I went from fitness to personal development, 80% of my clients in fitness were female. So when I started doing workshops, it was all women coming to the workshops. And if there was ever a man, I'd assume they'd been dragged along. And that was the case. They'd always been dragged along. And then over the years, there was a shift in the room where by pre-pandemic, half the room was men, which was kind of blew my mind a little bit because something new for a lot of these guys. And then I started doing men's only work. I think part of it was like, I think part of what can happen in life is you try things, and sometimes things that you didn't plan work, and it might not be your first choice, but if it's of value to people, like for me, I was like, okay, I think I have a unique voice in this space, and I think I can support men in a way that other people aren't going to be able to. Other people will do it differently, but I know I've got gifts that I can share, and men are showing up, so it's a duty of care in some ways for me to do this. Like, this was not part of the plan, but that's what led me to the men's stuff. And yeah, but on a very simple level, the thing that comes up in men's work, I'd love to say at the end of a workshop, guys say, wow, Pat, that was really profound what you said. But it's nothing to do with me. What guys always share is that it's nice to know I'm not the only one who goes through what I'm going through, because we just share in a group what's happening for us. And guys are struggling with trying to keep everything together. And where do I share my pain? I know during the pandemic, I ran a men's group for 2 years online. We'd meet once a week. We'd just have the chats and stuff like that. And in those 2 years, there was a couple of guys lost their fathers. There was a couple of guys became fathers. A couple of guys got divorced. A couple of guys started new relationships. A couple of guys ended up. There was so much that happened. And I was like, wow, if this is 30 guys and you've got deaths, you've got births, you've got business failures, you've got so much happening within 30 guys. And there's so much pain in all of that and change in all of that. And if those 30 guys have nowhere to share all of that, what happens to that? And it's kind of where we started today. If the emotion has nowhere to go, it gets leaked in toxic ways. It gets leaked in dangerous ways. This is why men cause a lot of harm in the world. It's because there's a lot of unprocessed pain. And so they don't know what to do with that pain, and they put it somewhere. So if that's 30 guys, imagine with hundreds of thousands of guys or millions of guys. And of course, women, similar stuff. But my focus has been men.
So, self esteem is confidence in one's own worth or abilities. I personally think, from the amount of people that I would speak to, whether it be from family, from people you work with, I think probably 80% of people have very low self esteem, whether they show it or not. Maybe I'm being very negative, but how can people who have that level of low esteem improve it? What's the number one way you see people improve, bring from low self esteem to high self esteem? The way they see their own worth and abilities to be higher.
I think maybe it's from knowing yourself. Like, the more you get to know yourself, the more you can improve your esteem. Because if your way of growing self-esteem, I know Alex Hermosi and these guys talk about, get your reps in, and I think that's important. I think you'll grow in confidence by putting your reps in. Um, but it's one thing to develop skills and to believe in those skills, but self-esteem to me is a deeper thing. It's like believing in myself. You know, below you take all my skills away, do I believe in myself? So I think it's maybe twofold. Self-esteem to me is the more I know myself. If I look online, there's a million things I could be doing in my life. And if I don't know which of those options to pick, I'm always going to feel like I'm lacking because I'm looking at all the things that I can't do. But if I kind of decide this is what's important to me in my life and I go in on that thing, that's going to help me build my self-esteem, I think, because it gives me a focus, gives me direction. It takes away the pressure of having to do it all. I know there's a million things in life I'm not going to do, and there's a handful of things I am. And I feel like I'm coming into the second half of my life, and I'm like, I know what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so I'm focused on that stuff. And I'm done with trying to please everyone. I'm done with trying to do everything. So I think that's useful for self-esteem. And then from a confidence standpoint, I do think that getting your reps in thing is important. Like when I started public speaking, I was terrified. And my strategy was I did 100 talks for free in a year. And I just went up and down the country, spoke in schools, colleges, spoke in an old lady's shed who told me she had a gym, and I showed up and it was just her and her friends in the shed. I spoke in takeaways, I spoke in pubs, I spoke anywhere, and I got my reps in. And I think that's where confidence comes from. But esteem is how you feel about yourself and how you see yourself when you look in the mirror. You can be very good at something and still have low self-esteem, but get to know who you are, and I think your self-esteem will improve.
You said you're entering the second phase of your life almost. You feel like your priorities may slightly change. Can you just open up a little bit more about that? Exactly what you mean by that?
Um, I think my 20s were like a lot of exploration of different things. Like I've gone in so many different directions. I studied obviously the fitness and hypnosis, NLP, logotherapy, Jungian psychology, breathwork, meditation. Like gone in so many different directions, and I enjoy that exploring. And it was funny actually. I was in Thailand maybe at the start of the year, and I met some of the trainers out there. There's quite a famous trainer out there, and I said hello to him, and I didn't think he'd know me. And he said, "You're the reason I came to Thailand." He said, used to listen to your podcast, and that's what gave me the faith to come to Thailand." And I was like, wow. And I was looking at him and I was thinking, wow, this guy's like really well known in fitness now because he went all in on fitness. And I was feeling like I started in fitness and now I'm doing all these different things and I'm not really known for anything anymore. So I was thinking I want to kind of refine now and just like find my way and find my sense of direction. So my vision for my life is to give new solutions to mental health, like and create like tangible changes to people's mental health. And I'm doing it through breath work for the next couple of years, but after that it'll be something different. So it's about having more of a sense of my mission in life, recognize I've tried lots of things and I have a sense of what I want to do now. It's about making space. Like I'm not in relationship at the moment, but I want to like have a healthy relationship in my life. So my 20s was just work and hustle and grind and be busy. And I don't want to be all those things anymore. And it's more about enjoying life and not just, so some of those things are important to me, I think, at this stage. I think there's phases again in life, and I think part of your life is about figuring out what you need to do. And I think once you find it, you can kind of go all in on that. So that's where I'm at.
They say money and financial success doesn't lead to true happiness in someone. Do you believe that to be true? And if so, because I think the narrative on it has been very pushed, like money doesn't make you happy.
Yeah.
So it's been pushed really, really far one way. Do you feel it's a little bit more in the middle? Or are you also of the same opinion that it doesn't have any correlation to happiness or satisfaction?
We started by talking about survival states and stress, and we said that if you're stressed, you'll live in reactivity. And I think if you're broke, you're going to be stressed, which will keep you in reactivity, which will keep you in old patterns. So it's very hard to, like, personal development's a luxury for us. You know, a lot of people don't have the luxury of getting to look at their patterns or to meditate or any of these things because they're just struggling to keep their head above water. I think there's probably a tipping point. I don't think you need a huge amount more than, I think they've done research, right? And they've said after a certain point, I think after $70,000 a year, they say in America, there's very little change in terms of how people feel. There's a pretty good change up to 70,000, and that's like the sweet spot where people are comfortable, happy, can do what they need to do. It's the same thing. It's this black and white thinking of money's the worst thing in the world or it's the best thing in the world. It's like, no, money's a tool. And back to what we talked about earlier, Tony Robbins says, I think success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. That means you can have all the material success in the world, but if you don't feel fulfilled, that's hard. And that's hard because you look around you and you say, but I've got everything. Why do I still not feel at peace? And generally it's back to those two things. I'm not contributing or I'm not growing. And if I tick those two boxes, then I'll start to feel again in my life.
My last few questions for you. Firstly, what are some of your non-negotiables on a day-to-day basis that you have in your life nowadays?
I'm not as structured as I used to be, but there's certain things that probably just happen every day. I do jujitsu most days. That's my social outlet. It's my physical outlet. It's just a passion. It gets me into the present moment. I study every day. I study weird and wonderful stuff all the time. I'm always
Study
studying.
like what? Like more.
A lot of online courses, audiobooks,
Okay.
books. I study, I would say I study 4 or 5 hours a day.
Wow.
That's my passion. That's what I love. I love studying and teaching ultimately. So that could be anything. I'm studying a bunch of weird stuff at the moment, but study, training, those are the two fundamentals, to be honest. I try to eat reasonably well. I do a bit of breath work, but there's nothing too, I'm not too rigid or structured, to be honest.
What's one big goal you have for yourself in the next 12 months that you're happy to share and talk about?
Um, I have a breathwork school now where I teach breathwork facilitators. So I would like to certify 200 facilitators next year. That's my big target from a work standpoint. And I'm looking to move to a different country for a year in January. So that's another kind of lifestyle thing of stepping away from my comfort zone.
So, 21 years old 2 weeks ago. What would your advice be to 21-year-old Pat Divilly?
Trust trust the process, and the biggest thing I noticed was when I lived in Dublin and I tried to get a fitness business off the ground. I was looking at what other people were doing, and I had these grandiose goals of having 100 clients. And what I didn't realize at 21 was that to have 100 clients, you have to get your first client. And it sounds silly, but it was like I was so obsessed with this big number. And sometimes when your goal is so far removed from where you are, there's a hopelessness that comes with that. So when I came back to Galway and everything fell apart and I got my first 5 clients, it changed my life. And I was like, wow, like this is amazing. And I was so lit. I was never excited in my life as the day I got 500 followers on Facebook. Like that changed my life. I was like, wow. So having the 5 clients allowed me to get to 6, allowed me to get to 7, and then eventually got me to 20,000. So my advice, I think, would be start where you are, do what you can, trust the process, have patience. I think your 20s are about trying different things, putting yourself out there, laying good foundations for yourself. But that's the thing. I think you can only act from where you are. So don't be in your head thinking about where you're supposed to be. Take what you have and work with it.
If you had to recommend someone for me to have on the podcast that you think I could learn from, who would you recommend?
That's a good question. Anyone? Is there any area in particular?
I would really like to be similar to today. I really enjoy sitting across from someone who I find that I'm mentally challenged the whole time they're speaking. I'm constantly thinking about what they're saying. They're bringing up ideas I've never heard before, and it's all fresh and new, and it's really challenging. That's something I'd like to be challenged. I would like to feel nervous before speaking to someone.
Okay. Oh God, I should know the answer to this. For some reason, Willa White is coming to me.
Okay.
Willa's a comedian in Dublin. He's got an amazing backstory. He's got his own podcast. I can definitely set you up with Willa if you'd like to do that. He's a great guy.
And comedians are a very interesting one all the time because they're contemplating life all the time because they have to try find the funny side in it.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of interesting thoughts on life, it seems.
He's a powerful story. He's an incredible guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll remember that one. How do you want to be remembered to, first of all, any of the clients you've helped previously? And second of all, the people who are more important to you, your family, your very close friends, etc.
I'd like people to think I was all heart, that there wasn't pretense with me. I didn't hide. I showed up in my messiness, and I showed up with my heart on my sleeve. I think that's the most important thing, and I followed my bliss. And I made my own rules.
Before I let you go, just let anyone who's watching or listening know, if they haven't heard of you before, where can we go to find you, listen to more of your story, and perhaps buy some of these great books that you've written?
Thank you. PatDivilly.com is my website. I have a podcast, but I stopped recording a year ago. There's 250 episodes up there. PatDivilly.com.
Pat, I greatly appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Pleasure. Well done. Thank you.